I don't subscribe to other people's anger or fear. Throughout my professional career, I listened to people who were scared and let that influence me, stopping me from doing things until I had the courage or confidence to start doing things differently or my own way. That's when things started to becoming more successful, getting more opportunities. I was in a constant loop of what I call part-time courage or part-time confidence. Is when I knew I could do something, I was confident. But until I built up that time, there was this ongoing drama, trauma, self-doubt, which basically led to doing longer hours at work than was necessary. In many cases, picking up work I thought other people weren't doing, and if things weren't done, it would look bad, possibly by me on association rather than the team. And it was a tough life lesson. And I've got a rare autoimmune condition, Addison's disease. My body doesn't produce the stress hormone cortisol. If you can imagine a marathon runner not being able to drink water on 42 kilometers they need to run on a hot summer's day, that's what Addison's disease is like. When you're having some kind of psychological or physical stress, your immune system is boosted by cortisol. Mine doesn't. My point here is that a lot of the times I was in hospital was because of stress associated with work. And that took far too many times, and to be honest, almost dying from a severe acute Addisonian crisis to actually bring about those changes. That really funnels my leadership and the way I communicate, because I applied the filter on what I was actually listening to and who I was listening to. Also who I was spending time with. And that's what I mean about not subscribing to anger or fear. I mean, we're surrounded by angry news, opinion news, conspiracies, far right, far left, all of this angry commentary on social media, which I mainly avoid, spending most of my time on LinkedIn, a bit more on Substack, and watching things on YouTube, but I tend to avoid other platforms. And I see the anger and I go, what's the point of this? What are people getting angry about and why? And are you doing anything about it? It could be as simple. So a few years ago in Sydney, Australia, there was a report into the New South Wales Police, and decades of not dealing with LGBTQ plus hate crimes. In the last few decades of the 20th century, gay men were being murdered and the crimes weren't being investigated properly. It was a big inquiry, and there were lots of members of the community commenting on social media. But I sent 2 emails to my state MP saying, how's the inquiry going? Had a few concerns, got a letter back from the police minister, and then once the inquiry report was published, there was another correspondence with the state MP and a letter from the police minister outlining how they were going to implement the findings of the inquiry, so to make the police more inclusive, learn from the failings and bring about cultural change. Yet I still see lots of people being angry about different things, but how many of those people have actually written to their MP, had a conversation with somebody in the police, or got involved or doing something meaningful or constructive? And that's where I find a lot of people get lost. They're influenced. It influences the way they react to things, how they operate in the workplace, because the fear of anger, making people angry and shouted at, or saying the wrong thing, or actually the fear of doing something in case it angers others. I mean, have you ever said to somebody who's like so steadfast and so rigid in their position, I disagree with you, and actually had the courage to have a conversation with them, and that person who continues being belligerent, berating you, walking away, or at least saying, well, this is what you're doing, or challenging them on their anger and what they're doing. Because it's a very safe space, it really is. There's a huge comfort blanket around being angry, being scared, and not going to the next stage of actually tackling a problem, or even stepping up and being a leader. And that's why I mention about not subscribing to other people's anger or fear. Now, moving that over to fear, I consider in a professional and business context that really there are 4 types of fears, which are more false beliefs. So there are obviously many different types of fears, but fears which really impact your critical thinking, your strategic thinking, your performance, your aspirations, the way you communicate, the way you interact with others, and your potential. And the first one is the internal voice, and that's really what we say to ourselves. You know, I can't do this, I'm not good at that, I won't be able to. And that self-doubt that creeps in. The second one is the external voice. It could be the social voice, particularly on social media, and it's what other people say to you. You can't do this, you're not ready for this, you're wrong. All of those negative things that other people say, often they're rooted in their own fear or anger, and they're masking their own doubt by imprinting that onto you, and that really can impact how you think and your level of confidence and self-esteem. And if you run a business or any large organisation, there is the organisational voice. I recently came across a post on LinkedIn which described the person who's an obstacle. So in the UK, calling somebody a knob is like, you know, a bit of an idiot, bit of a jerk, what they might say in America. But there's that one knob who became the obstacle, and it could be they're rooted in fear, or they just make things difficult. And usually they would say something like, oh, we can't do this, others are better than this, look at what that company's doing. They're really that barrier inside the organisation. They're often very dogmatic, almost like a dinosaur. Or the other aspect is somebody's so scared, or a few people are so scared of change, but program things that are happening, that fear really ripples around the organisation. That's really the organisational voice. And the final one is around false beliefs is the market voice. And it's what the market says, not so much customers. And it might be customers don't like this, customers don't need this. If you consider the launch of the iPhone, Nokia, BlackBerry, the 2 biggest mobile devices, the one you would think would capture the market of smartphones, yet were obsolete almost within a few years. Now, do they make phones? I don't know. Maybe Nokia still does. But they were primed. But the market, we customers, were wanting better phones. Apple, Samsung came in, completely revolutionised the industry. Now, perhaps in your business, in your organisation, it's very much around watching the market, what others are doing, or listening to suppliers, and not making that first move. And that's really another self-doubt that creeps into self-doubt. But those are 4 false beliefs. Now, as a leader, you start changing the way you think. I can do this, or I will be able to do this, and you start turning that internal dialogue around. The way you engage with detractors. You may think so, I disagree, this is what I'm doing, I don't care what you think. Or actually engaging with somebody in a conversation, somebody may have a really good perspective and they're not seeing your goal or your purpose. And the third, as a leader, actually just listening to people. What are their concerns? Do they have a perspective, a great idea? Listening to understand, but really challenging that fear. Challenging through being trustworthy, open communication, and at some stage dealing with the detractors. If somebody doesn't need to be employed by the organisation, if they're such a gremlin, such a dinosaur, making things so hard to achieve anything, and they're being disruptive, bringing in HR, deal with that. And the market voice, you're a thought leader, sharing your opinions. Think of the great inventors, things that we now take for granted today. It was just over 100 years ago that the first kind of television, not broadcast, but John Logie Baird actually showed the capability of a television broadcast in the UK. You imagine all the detractors he'd have had, but I think it was 1936 the first television broadcast took place in Alexandra Palace in London, and then obviously it was only people who worked that could afford that, and then it was stopped because of the Second World War. But 30 years later, television was the primary form of communication medium in the world. So if it weren't for people who were prepared to go, they're wrong, I'm not going to listen to this, we wouldn't be probably enjoying things that we do today. Or it would be something different. Somebody else would have come up with the idea, or actually progress the idea. These are the raw examples of why I don't subscribe to other people's anger and fear. Now, the anger piece, we're in this cycle of constant anger, grievance, whatever you believe is fueling it. A lot of it is being circulated by algorithms on social media. Ultimately, we have a choice on what we decide to engage with, what to follow, where we spend our time, what we communicate with.